CIA locked into this in the 1950s. They discovered it in Munich, of all places, Munich, Germany, close to where I live. They found a Nazi network that was called I forget the name now, but it's in the book. But they dealt with the eastern areas, but with Muslims recruited from the territory of the Soviet Union. There are many, many nominal Muslims in the Soviet Union then, and the Nazis recruited them because they realized they have such ferocity to kill. So they were picked up by the Nazis after the end of the war. They went back to Egypt and Palestine and so forth. And when the Brotherhood attempted to assassinate Gamal Abdul Naser, the president of Egypt, and failed, they were driven underground. Miles Copeland, the CIA station chief in Cairo, smuggled the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood out of Egypt into Saudi Arabia. And there began the fateful, I call it marriage made in hell, between the Muslim Brotherhood with the Wahhabi strain of Islam in Saudi Arabia. So what happened after the 50s and the 60s is that Saudi money financed the creation of the Muslim World League in Jeddah. And the Muslim World League was the evangelical, if you want to call it that, arm of the Muslim Brotherhood, going out into Pakistan, into Afghanistan, into all over the Islamic world where it was possible. And that is what precisely gave birth to the Mujahideen, the CIA project called Operation Cyclops.
To begin with, Saudi Arabia wanted to use Islamism in its fight against any external threat that may have an internal impact. I'll give you one example. In the 1950s and 60s, Saudi Arabia saw the threat to its regime coming from the leftist movement in the Arab world and also from Arab nationalism. And it used Islamism as a counterforce to actually destroy these two movements. And therefore, it sponsored Islamic education, it sponsored Islamic opinions that depict these movements as atheism. And also, during the Cold War, it enlisted its ideology on behalf of the West in order to fight battles elsewhere, such as, for example, in Afghanistan. And therefore, the Saudi Wahhabi dimension of all this Al-Qaeda is extremely important, although the Saudi regime tries to distance itself from this kind of radicalism.
I think it's important, too, that the Americans were fully in on this. There's a fairly well-known quote from Eisenhower where he says, we will use the Saudis' role in defending Mecca to help promote them as the defenders of Islam throughout the Muslim world, where he says we will use the Saudis' role in defending Mecca to help promote them as the defenders of Islam throughout the Muslim world, and they'll help us fight Nasserism and nationalism and socialism. I may not be quoting it exactly, but I'm pretty close.
Yes, absolutely. This was part of the Cold War strategy, and Saudi Arabia deployed its ideology and support and also funds in order to fight wars elsewhere. But the problem for Saudi Arabia is when this ideology came back to haunt the country itself. And it is almost like having a battle with your own ideology. And therefore, it's very difficult for the Saudis to get rid of this kind of menace. And they haven't learned lessons from 9/11. So if you look at what is going on in Syria now, in Syria, they have the Saudis have created armed rebels who are actually almost working on behalf of the Saudis in Syria. So that the Syrian revolution was derailed and lost its democratic slogans, and now it became a sectarian war between different groups, Shia and the Sunnis. And with Saudi intervention, we find that the rebels who were promoted were called the Islamic Front. And we have seen how this was unfolding in Syria. until recently, Saudi Arabia allowed its own young men to travel to Syria, or if it didn't allow them, it kept a blind eye. And only recently, just a week before Obama's visit, Saudi Arabia introduced this new anti-terrorism law, which says that anybody who goes to Syria and come back will face 20 years in prison. And the interesting thing is, yes, we may keep a blind eye on those people going, but we're going to arrest them when they come back. But there was no effort that was obvious to me that they will make sure they do not go there to fight.
Well, it may be that they're going to make them stay there and fight with a law like that.
I think the best thing that Saudi regime can hope for is for them to go and die there.
That's sort of what I was saying. There seems to have been a change from the days when the Saudis seemed to be very concerned about attacks on their regime in Saudi Arabia from al-Qaeda forces. There seems to have been a kind of accommodation in some way that now, in fact, it seems that the al-Qaeda type forces are almost like part of the way the Saudis wage asymmetrical warfare and use them in leverage. I mean, the most obvious place is in Syria, but you see it in Iraq. But then you see these threats. I talked about 9/11, but we know about Bandar's threat, Prince Bandar's threat to Tony Blair when there was an inquiry into the bribery scandal based on Saudis buying several $1 billion of weapons, and apparently Bandar got a $1 billion bribe, and Bandar says to Blair, you better stop this inquiry or I can't promise there won't be another 7/7 when the buses blew up in London. And more recently, apparently Bandar threatened Putin and said, we control the Chechen terrorists. It seems like it's a lever of power in their hands.
Yes, absolutely. And we have seen since 2008, there were no terrorist attacks in Saudi Arabia. They managed to push Al-Qaeda to Yemen, basically. They haven't destroyed it. They haven't removed it. They simply had forced it to migrate to Yemen, and a lot of Saudis have left Saudi Arabia to go there. But the interesting thing is it has been used as a sort of a pressure on foreign governments, meaning that you do as we want you to do, or we will not cooperate with you in terms of intelligence cooperation, or we would actually they wouldn't put it so directly, but it is a subtle hint that when the Serious Fraud Office in Britain wanted to open up the Al Yamama weapons deal and the corruption that was involved with BAE system, the Saudis immediately announced that if this serious fraud investigation goes ahead, they will cease to cooperate with Britain on intelligence, meaning that we will not be able to help you catch the terrorist, basically. And it is interesting that they may have had quite a close relationship. They know them so well that they hold information about them that they're only going to release to those other intelligence services that cooperate with the Saudis, and also in governments that are supposedly friendly governments.
The special relationship was especially useful in the CIA effort to take down secular regimes, beginning with Nasser in Egypt. They offered financial backing and sanctuary to the Muslim Brotherhood, a documented CIA and British intelligence asset. The Saudis exploited the special relationship to export its Wahhabi brand of Islam. Between 1975 and 2003, the Saudi government spent over $70 billion building mosques and religious schools around the world. Private Saudi citizens spent billions more on Wahhabi projects. Charities such as the Muslim World League and its affiliate, the International Islamic Relief Organization, were headed up by Saudi government officials and closely tied to the government. Propaganda and indoctrination by the Wahhabi sect against infidels and branding other Muslims as apostates and an emphasis on jihad has led to radicalization and terrorism. Terror groups the U.S. says it's fighting against are directly influenced by Wahhabism. These include Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, Al-Nusra, and dozens of other groups.
والحق أن مصطلح الإرهاب هو مصطلح محمود ومصطلح مطلوب شرعا. وقد تتعجبوا، كلمة الإرهاب هي مصطلح يريدها الله سبحانه وتعالى ويريدها الرسول صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم، لقول الله تعالى: وأعدوا لهم ما استطعتم من قوة ومن رباط الخيل ترهبون به عدو الله وعدوكم.